welcome to this Euractiv virtual conference. My name is Sean Goulding-Carroll. I'm a journalist covering transport and environment issues, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. So today's event is supported by the Environmental Defence Fund and is titled Decarbonising Shipping: What Role Can Climate Labels Play? You're all very welcome, and thank you for joining me online. Just to note that our Q&A session later will include questions from our viewers, so you're warmly encouraged to submit your questions through Slido using the hashtag CII. Well, Europe's transport sector is undergoing an environmental revolution as the EU's target of reaching carbon neutrality by 2050 obliges deep emissions cuts across industry. Transport has traditionally been one of the most difficult sectors to cut emissions from, with CO2 output continuing to rise even as other sectors' emissions fall. To reverse this trend, lawmakers have turned their regulatory gaze to various transport modes, walking the difficult tightrope of reining in emissions without hampering the mobility of people and goods. In the maritime sector, which is responsible for almost 3% of emissions globally, this has taken the form of a new law that requires ships to use an increasing percentage of low-carbon fuels. The maritime sector was also added to the EU's carbon market, the emissions trading system, forcing shippers for the first time to pay for their carbon pollution. But of course, the maritime sector extends far beyond Europe, and at the level of the UN's International Maritime Organization, or IMO, measures are also being put in place to incentivize cleaner shipping. One such measure is to assign ships with a rating based on their carbon intensity using a scale running from A to E. Known as the Carbon Intensity Indicator, or CII rating, this scale is seen as a means to encourage greater environmental efficiency. But proponents say that more can be done with the label to incentivize cleaner shipping, such as restricting access to European ports to ships with a certain climate rating. So today, we'll be discussing the decarbonisation of the maritime sector with a particular focus on the role climate labels can play in guiding us to a cleaner shipping future. Before we continue, I'd also like to address an issue regarding the lineup of speakers. You may have noticed from the program that all of today's speakers are male, which of course isn't what we aim for. In this case, Euractiv's events team reached out to several female speakers, but unfortunately those speakers were not able to join today's debate. Euractiv does try to have a gender balance in each event, and we apologize for not achieving that in this case. With that said, I'm still very pleased to discuss this issue with the panel of experts, whom I have the pleasure of introducing to you now. I'm delighted to be joined by Timothée Noël, a policy officer with the European Commission's Directorate General for Climate, Daniel Barcarolo, Head of Regulation with Maersk Mckinney Møller Centre for Zero Carbon Shipping, and Panos Spiliotis, Senior Manager for EU Transport with the Environmental Defence Fund. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Just another note that unfortunately Ricardo Batista from DG Move was called to a council meeting, so he is unable to join us this morning, and he sends his apologies. So to kick off, I will invite each panelist to provide a short opening statement of just a couple of minutes, which will be followed by our Q&A session. So firstly, I would like to give the floor to Timothée Noël. Timothée, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean, for the introduction, and good morning to all participants. And thank you for the invitation to this interesting event. I have an echo. I don't know if I'm the only one to hear it. Could you please confirm, Sean?
For me, the sound is fine, so feel free to continue.
Okay, thanks. So as a general introduction, and before I think diving into the topic of carbon intensity indicators or climate labels, as you define them, I thought it would be good to stress again the overall policy context and remind the audience about the encouraging policy development that took place this year both at the European and at the global level. I mean, if we start at the global level, and you quickly mention it in your introduction, the revised IMO GHG strategy, which was reached in July, is an important milestone. It's a right step in the right direction. And it's now very important, it's essential that we start implementing as soon as possible. We need to agree at IMO collectively on the specific measures that will allow the sector as a whole to reach net zero emissions by 2050, which is an ambitious objective. And we also need to ensure that we have the right policy framework in place to achieve the trajectory that was also set in the revised strategy, so with indicative checkpoints for 2030 and 2040. And for that, we need all type of measures. We will need to count on the results on the short-term measures that typically includes the carbon intensity indicators, so those climate labels, but also the EEXI, and of course complemented by the very much awaited mid and long-term measures that need to be agreed and put in place as soon as possible, and that should include a GHG fuel standard and a carbon price mechanism. So I think when we're speaking about CII and climate labels, we also need to ask ourselves what could they do in order to help the sector achieve the targets that were set in the revised IMO GHG strategy. Now, at European level, as many of you might know, this year has been also a special year, as a number of new EU policies have been approved to ensure that the shipping sector contributes its fair share to our EU climate effort. And these new policies were part of the Fit for 55 package. And things are going pretty quickly. Since now, in 3 weeks' time from now, the EU will be the first jurisdiction in the world to put a price signal on emissions from the sectors to drive decarbonization of shipping in line with the polluter pays principle. The extension of the emission trading system to maritime will make energy efficiency investments more attractive for companies, whether they are technical improvement or operational improvement. It will also reduce the price gap between fossil fuel and alternative fuels. And it will also come with funding opportunities, notably through the Innovation Fund. And in parallel to the extension of the emission trading system to maritime, the EU has also adopted a specific regulation, so namely the Fuel EU Maritime Regulation, but also the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, to create all the conditions that are necessary to support the development at scale of the market of alternative fuel and the use of onshore power supply. So in this context, as you might imagine, the priority is clearly for the moment to ensure that we have all the rules set in place in order to guarantee and ensure the swift and thorough implementation of these new policies at European level in order to improve and start the decarbonization and accelerate the decarbonization of the sector. So these are the key aspects that I wanted to highlight before starting discussing more in details about climate labels and CII. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. You mentioned a number of measures there. Hopefully we'll have time to delve into them during our discussion today. I'll now hand over to Daniel Barcarolo. Daniel, your opening remarks, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come here and discuss. It's a very relevant topic for us to discuss the CII. And thank you for Timothy for the introduction on the wider scope of regulations that we have at play right now. Where can I start? I think the CI has been here for us very important for, I would say, for 2 years, more or less, because we're ending in like 2023, and we started to discuss CII and EXI and EDI and all the other regulations in the center already in 2022 before they were enforced. And clearly, I think the CII has brought a lot of good things to the industry, because it has raised the debate in a way. It has created this standardized way to look into carbon intensity. At least it has created a common language. We all know, at least I hope that everybody knows about the CII, what A means, what E means. Sometimes A means good, sometimes A could mean something that is not so good. And on the other hand, as well for the E-rated vessels. So I think overall the CII has created this really, really nice discussion around the carbon intensity. We have been seeing not only the ship owners, but our ship operators and the cargo owners bringing the CII to discussion, financiers bringing the CII to discussion. So I think that this momentum around the CII that the CII has created is quite good, and we need to leverage on it. Of course, bad things about the CII or things that need to be fixed around the CII. I think there has been sufficient communication out there, both at IMO or in the press about things that the CII sometimes is lagging or is not promoting correctly. And I think we should take the opportunity of the discussion that we have around the CII to bring a positive momentum to try to fix the CII in a good way. I think we have this opportunity, we know the opportunity towards 2026, where by when the CII needs to be revised. And we have a project ongoing here in the center by which we are trying to collect as much data as possible through our partners and and the industry to try to build on a few hypotheses. We have been working with the metric, we have been working with fleet approach, we have been working with many other topics to try to come up with suggestions to make the CII even better than what it is. I'm very happy to discuss the CII today with all of you. And I think that the debate around the CII has become even more important with the revised strategy that Timothée raised today. Because I think now we could think about the CII as a policy that is there, is active, the industry is used to it. And we need to enhance the CII in order to bring the IMO GHG strategy towards to be achieved. So right now, of course, we have the 40% carbon intensity reduction, which has been used in the past to guide the CII developments. This 40% carbon intensity reduction by 2030 is still there in the IMO GHG strategy, but we have additional goals in the IMO GHG strategy. We have the 5 to 10% uptake of fuels or energy, and we have the 20 to 30% checkpoint. So I think these additional items in the strategy, I think, could be used to give more strength to the CII. Of course, people say that we're going to have the midterm measures into place. We have the ETS, we have the TUU, and all of these is complementary. Yes, they are. Nonetheless, I think that the midterm measures will need to be developed at the same time as the CII is developed. So we will not have the luxury, I think, as an industry, to wait until the midterm measures are fully designed so that we can think about the CII. So I think we need to put pressure or to put all levers on all the policies that we have in the making, or the ones that are active, to drive the transition of shipping. So I'm glad to take part of this panel to discuss the questions, and that's it for my side as an introduction.
Thank you. You mentioned the CII has raised the debate and created a common language, but you also mentioned some challenges. So I look forward to exploring that more with you shortly. So last but certainly not least, I'll now give the floor to Panos Spiliotis of the Environmental Defence Fund. Panos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm also delighted to be part of this panel this morning. So the EU, to start with the EU, will soon implement its Fit for 55 package for shipping. The EU ETS and Fuel EU are both landmark achievements. No other region has done anything equivalent. They will help raise revenues for green shipping and will gradually make green fuels the default choice for ships. And green e-fuels, including e-methanol and e-ammonia, will come to replace today's marine fuels. At Environmental Defence Fund, we have been working on green e-fuels for a few years now. and the industry is also getting serious about this pathway. Nonetheless, ships burn 300 million tons of oil every year, so producing an equivalent amount of green fuel will actually take a major industrial transformation. So at the same time, shipping needs to be maximizing efficiency to lay the ground for its energy transition. So we have to make the existing entire shipping fleet leaner and greener. Good news is that ships could achieve significant reductions by installing energy-saving technologies and greening their operations. These measures can also save ship owners as well as cargo owners a serious amount of money. So it's all good news. And the global regulator, and the other panelists have touched on this, IMO, has also raised its ambition last summer in MEPC 80. We have a really strong new strategy. And the first indicative checkpoint says that we will aim for 20 to 30% emissions reductions in 2030 from a 2008 base. So that's ambitious. What we would like to throw into the equation or propose is that the CII, or the carbon intensity indicator, is the best tool at our disposal to achieve these reductions, and at the very least, an essential part of the mix of our basket of measures to achieve these reductions. It was endorsed by IMO's 175 states. And I think that's what perhaps Daniel meant when he called it a common language. It was something that was debated at length at IMO when it was adopted in 2021 as a way to judge and improve the climate performance, the tank-to-wake climate performance of large ships. So as of next year, all large ships will have a grade from A to E. So in one sense, it is a climate label. So we have advised IMO to publish every ship's grade, because that way those who might be looking for ways to make sustainable decisions, including investors and cargo owners, can do so more easily. And we want the EU, during the IMO debate that will ensue, to keep up the pressure on this point. So this is something important. It is a label. It is helpful information to the market. But perhaps more importantly, CII is also a policy measure. Ships are expected to achieve a C grade. But there remains uncertainty around the extent and the seriousness of CII enforcement when you look at the global landscape. So that's something that really needs to be looked at during the IMO review. And that's something that any state or region can do better already on today as we speak. Analysis that we commissioned showed that raising EU-related ships to an A grade would lead to a 30% emissions reduction. But even raising them from the worst, in fact, non-compliant categories, D and E upwards, comes with benefits as well, because the grades get more stringent with every year that passes. So here we think the EU and member states could do more, and we can talk about what form that could take. We're not wedded to any particular idea, but for example, they could, through requirements, bring in policies that help to raise ships to the A grade and B grade that is in line with IMO's 2023 strategy.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's now move on to the question and answer portion of the event, our wider discussion. Just a reminder that you can, for those watching this, you can submit your questions through Slido using the hashtag CII. You should see a QR code on your screen. Panos, maybe I can start with you. So you mentioned having a database, a global database of A to E ship grades, and this would help, in your opinion, accelerate shipping decarbonization. Can you tell us how this would be done in practice and how this database can help accelerate shipping decarbonisation?
Yeah, I mean, there was a proposal already in the last MEPC to create a more transparent way to access some of the data, the wealth of data that lives within IMO, so the DCS, and specifically those parts that help you derive what a ship's grade are. And this was, I think this led to an interesting discussion. The European Union was clearly in favor, but there was no final decision made. So I think this could be a very useful thing to do, because if you know what grade ships, or what is the efficiency, how green the ships are within the fleet of a company, or a cargo owner, a retailer that wants to move their goods around the world sustainably, then one of the things they could easily do is just avoid some of the worst, the most polluting ships. But they need to have access to the grades to be able to do that. There are some other ways. For example, BIMCO, the association, proposed a draft contract, basically a charter party, that would allow a contract to be established conditionally on the ship achieving certain grades, which is great. That's also a really good development, and I hope cargo owners will take that on board. But having a publicly accessible database that can also be accessed by researchers and NGOs and anyone who's interested in the climate performance of ships would be ideal. So we look to the next meetings of MEPC and IMO to make progress on that. And we hope that the EU delegations will not give up on this point as the IMO agenda moves into the basket of measures.
Thanks. Well, Timothy, I'd like to get your opinion on this as well. Is it realistic and desirable? And is it something that the EU is going to push for, this database?
I think in general, disclosing information about environmental performance of ship, of assets is always welcome, and transparency is important to address the lack of information, to stimulate change in behaviors, in investments. And that's really the approach we've been following at the EU level. We have the EU Monitoring, Reporting and Verification Regulation that has been put in place in 2018. And all the data collected from this regulation is available online, and so you have really information per ship. You can see already now the emissions attached to every ship that calls a port in the EU. So transparency is really something that is behind the EU policy. And we indeed hope that we will have also more transparency at a global level, but we also know that it's a difficult discussion. But we see many merits of having more transparency. More transparency could also, as it was said by Panos, it could help researchers also better, understand the impact of CII, how to improve the system. So it has many merits. Such a database, publicly available database with all the rating of ships has not been proposed by the last MEPC. The interesting development that was proposed is at least to give the possibility for companies that want to make their data publicly available, so to have those data then publicly available. Meaning that if shipping companies that are committed towards decarbonization wants also to be transparent, they will have the ability to agree to publish and disclose their information.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Daniel, you've heard now from Timothy and from Panos. What's your opinion on this database?
I think that as soon as data becomes public, people start to be more worried about how they collect the data, how precise the data is, and then they try to work around the data to make it look better. That's a natural consequence when the data becomes public. And the UMRV has created this precedence of and that Timothy highlighted too, of showing at least that collecting the data and transparently making that data public can be done, and it can happen. Anyone can go and download the UMRV data and have a look into the fuel consumption from ships sailing into and outside. I mean, inside EU, to EU, and out, from EU. But it's also important to add to the discussion of data availability or transparency, the granularity of data. I think there's a difference between the DCS, which is the data collection system for the IMO, and the UMRV. The UMRV is more granular in data. You can actually see, the emissions in port stays, the emissions in different types of voyages, outside, inside. So we have much more granularity in the UMRV. And the DCS currently doesn't have that kind of granularity. So I think at the same time that we discuss availability of the data to the public, it's important to have the granularity of the data. And why is that important? Is because sometimes you might have a ship that is actually efficient while sailing, very efficient, but can have a bad rating because of long port stay, because of whatever circumstances make it, as a requirement for the ship to be there at anchor and then stop there and then just burn fuel for waiting, and it's not ultimately his fault. So a granularity of data would be able to provide also what is happening with the ship as well, and that's another discussion and another point that needs to be brought to the IMO. And I think that EU has been raising the awareness of the need for more granularity in the data. And data becomes even more important because of what has been highlighted by Panos and Timothy in the beginning. We're going to have other measures coming into play. We're going to have the midterm measures. We're going to have potentially a GHG pricing. We're going to have potentially a GFS, which is like a GHG standard, like to promote sustainable marine fuels for the industry. And more data will be required to be submitted to the IMO, and then maybe more transparency as well in all those data. So I think data, the discussion around data is quite important to make it public, yes, because this in itself would bring more awareness to the shipping industry. As soon as the data becomes public, people can start to be more careful what they are measuring, what they are disclosing, what they are submitting, and it goes all entire the chain. The verifiers will be potentially more careful about how they verify the data, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we need to discuss about the granularity and then the need for even more granularity because of the CII and the upcoming measures that are in discussion right now, the midterm measures. So that's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Well, Panos, you heard from Daniel that there's a need for greater granularity in the data. This feeds into a wider discussion about potential concerns with the CII. That, do the metrics accurately reflect the environmental performance of ships? What would you say about this need for more specific data, and also maybe if you could also address some of the more negative takes towards the CII?
Yeah, sure, Sean. Well, no metric is perfect, and CII is based on this AR formula that uses the tonnage, the capacity of the ship, rather than the cargo carried. And I think this has been a subject of discussion. I think what matters here is that this debate already happened at IMO leading up to the adoption of CII in 2021. And obviously, you can talk about shipping metrics until hell freezes over. They have advantages and disadvantages. But it's also important to take into account that IMO has agreed on a series of correction factors and guidelines to improve on the original version of the CII that was adopted. So, they were continuing to talk about these things until last summer. So it's a living metric that's being improved. Now, there are those who say that we really should be using EEOI that focuses on the efficiency, the carbon intensity of the cargoes carried. And perhaps that's a way forward in the future, but that shouldn't stop us from taking action to improve the CII of vessels today as it is defined today.
Thank you. Timothy, just following up on that, you've heard that there are some criticisms of the CII. Panos has also said that you can indeed continue to talk about metrics forever without making progress. Where does the Commission stand on this? Do you see it as a valuable metric, or do you also recognize that there are problems with the CII?
I think we need to be clear that the CII are not, subjective. The value, the achieved CII value is just the result of a simple division. It's the emissions emitted by the vessels divided by the transport work, assuming the carrying capacity of the vessel, so not the actual mass transported by the vessel. So it has some limits, and it needs, when you look at a CII value, you need to keep in mind the equation that you have behind the indicator. But per se, the value is not wrong. It's always the emissions divided by the maximum transport work based on the capacity of the vessel. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. I mean, CII are based on AER, on CGDist indicators. Those indicators, they're well known by the shipping industry. You have they use, for instance, in the Poseidon Principle by investors for years. So it's not like they're new indicators, but we know that it's not also the only indicators that exist. And what could say, for instance, that EEOI that are based on the real transport work of the vessels could be also valuable, because then you really have the carbon footprint of specific vessels. But as soon as you start taking into account the real transport work, so the mass carried by the vessels, then you will have more fluctuation. More fluctuation in the data means also more difficulty to set the reference line and so on. So you also enter into additional constraints. So I think there is no indicator that is really perfect, and we should look at the good things that have been brought by the introduction of CII, and I think this was highlighted both by Panos and Daniel. What we've seen is that we've seen companies that have started to look at in much more details about the operational carbon intensity performance of the vessels. They have starting, providing training to the operators of the vessels. They've started discussing with their charterers to try to include this parameter into charter parties. So already it had, I think, a number of very positive effects. It doesn't mean that the indicator is perfect. And I think what Daniel said is very true in the sense that more granularity is probably needed to understand, in fact, the reasons why a CII might be lower or higher than expected. And you could have cases where indeed the CII, the attained CII is poor because the ship is only doing very short trips. The ship is using a lot of energy to maneuver within ports. And therefore, these additional energy and emissions emitted will not be compensated by a higher distance travel that you have in the denominator of the formula. So I think the IMO has already agreed on a process to revise the CII. We need to go through that process. We need to collect data. We're speaking about an indicator in the form of the CII that is pretty recent. And so we need to collect this information. We need to collect, I think, additional, more granular information. And in that respect, the work that is being done by Daniel in collecting more data to understand exactly to try to correlate the CII value with other data is very important. And then we'll be on safe ground to see how to improve the system. But I would highlight, and I think it's important to look at the positive aspects that have been brought already by this system.
Thank you. Well, maybe Daniel, just to kind of put it quite bluntly, so we've heard that there are positives to this sector, but we also heard criticisms. The criticisms I've heard are that it doesn't reflect the improvement in operational energy efficiency, or that it favors ships sailing longer rather than shorter distances. Is the CII fit for purpose at the moment?
That's a very tough question to be asked. I think that the CI is quite interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say yes or no right now. I think that CI has a lot of potential if you think about it. I mean, the reason why we have the correction factors is, to some extent, is because the CI has the potential to be powerful in a way. That's the way that I take it. For example, everybody may affect the CII rating of a ship. Everybody, like all the actors that are around transportation or trade by ships. So, for instance, you could have a cargo owner that wants their cargo to be delivered from port A to port B in 2 days, and that will mean like a very high speed. But then the ship owner and the ship charter will say, well, that might affect my CII, and then I have a clause with my ship owner about the CII. So all the decisions that can be made around the ship can affect the CII. If, for instance, a charter wants to operate because there's a nice rate to go to a certain port, but then the charter also knows that, and the owner knows that if going to that port could bring the CII to a high E because of a tradition or a history in the particular port for waiting time, again, this brings the topic to discussion. Well, if you're going to that port with that vessel, it means that you might have an E, and because of that E, I may have to have a plan of corrective actions. So, I mean, ports, cargo owners, the financiers, also financing institutions have been looking to the CII to understand if a vessel is good or not good. But the problem is that, you have some nuances. It covers, the CI brings this discussion, yes. I would say that you will find vessels all over there that are well covered by the CII, that you can actually track for their true carbon intensity, or precisely track for the environmental aspect of that vessel in a good way. But there you also find vessels that are not covered. And because of those situations, and one of them that was highlighted today, like short voyages or waiting times, or because of specific cargoes that require heating, or specific cargoes that require cooling, or other specific operations of vessels, that has created this need for correction factors or exclusions that we have now in the formula. And so I think that it's fit for purpose in terms of bringing the discussion to a higher level, to bring the operational energy efficiency, operational carbon intensity to the discussion of everyday businesses. It has brought, as we see through projects that we are carrying here in the center, we have seen that the CI has brought more awareness into the data, has brought more awareness to the training, has brought more awareness to energy efficiency, has brought more awareness about the discussions with cargo owners, charter, and so on. Has brought more awareness in terms of more monitoring systems to monitor fuel consumption, to monitor vessel voyage performance, and so on. So it is fit for purpose to that extent. But of course, there are things that are not truly well covered, and there might be perversive incentives there because of the CII. What is important to track as CII is in a learning phase. It has been alluded to here today that there is a review process. Part of the review process is what we call like a lessons learned exercise that is to be undertaken by collecting data and so on, is to understand if those perversive or those things that go a little bit better with CII, how often does that appear? Is it common practice, or what is actually CII bringing to the industry? But that's part of the review process of the IMO. So by 2026, we need to understand what the CII is driving. We want to have a better understanding of what the CII is driving next year. Why, and here in the center with our partners or project partners. Why? Because we will have 1 year of CII already. This year, 2023, is the first year of the CII. Next year, we're going to have a full year of DCS, a full year rating, and we're going to understand how the industry has been coping with that. But it's with the objective to try to really understand what are the good things that the CII actually brought, the bad things, and try to find ways of mitigating for the bad things. And that's the line of work that we have here in the center. We don't want to work with here in the center. We do not want to work with correction factors or exclusions, because from our perspective, all emissions matter. We need to regulate all emissions. We need to reduce all emissions. So we're trying to think in a way that can we make the CII formula or the CII framework more holistic in terms of covering better how different vessels operate, different vessels are designed, and so on, with acknowledging that we might not solve all the problems. By introducing a solution for something, we might create a small problem somewhere else. And that's some things that we need to track with data. We are collecting data, as it was been alluded to by Timothy. And on the basis of that data, we are running calculations to substantiate and to have our analysis grounded on data. So, yeah, I think it's, so to summarize, I think it's fit for the discussion to be raised, to have this common ground of discussion. I think even having these sessions where people complain about the CII is good, because then we get to hear more. What are the pain points? And what are the things that need to be adjusted or thought through? Maybe for specific things, we need other type of regulations to come into place. So it's fit for that kind of discussion. But of course, it has some things that need to be fixed. And then people might think, okay, then it's not fit for some things. But at least I like the discussion that the CII is creating. That's a positive thing.
Thank you. Well, Panos, I want to give you a chance to respond, but I'm also curious to learn more about the Environmental Defence Fund idea of essentially restricting ships entering EU ports if they have an E grade. I'd also be curious to learn more about this.
Just one potential version of it. We're not wedded to a draconian way of applying the CII. What we are shining some light on, or putting the spotlight on, is the issue with enforcement or lack of enforcement. So we've spent some time just now talking about the shortcomings of CII, and that's a good thing. But of course, all policies need to be reviewed periodically, improved. None of them are perfect. Just look across other areas of transport. It's very difficult to please everyone. And when it comes to CII, it's transformative in its approach because it's goal-based and it's holistic. It doesn't just look, and this explains both the criticisms and the strong points or the advantages. It doesn't just look at what the vessel, the technical efficiency, or even what the ship owner or operator can do. It looks at all the determinants, all the drivers of carbon intensity of the operation. And that includes ports. It might even include the weather, so all these things need to be taken into account and optimized over time if we're going to achieve an improvement in shipping's climate performance. So for me, the elephant in the room with CII is not the formula, it's the lack of enforcement. So on the one hand, we are told by IMO that E is a failing grade and that D can only have D for 2 years in a row. But there's no bite to the sanctions, to not meeting that level of performance. And historically, the European Union has been really, really good at pushing the IMO and the rest of the global industry into really good measures that later on are recognized and celebrated by everyone. So, we think that this also applies to CII, and we want to see the EU push at IMO when the review happens in 2026, but also between now and then. There's nothing to say that we can't do more right now. And that's what the study that Sea Delft did for us showed, that first of all, the ambition of the existing reduction factors of CII are potent. The A grade and the B grade are equivalent to significant emissions reductions, assuming CII works, which I think we've established it more or less does. So why aren't ports doing more? Why aren't states doing more to use it? The IMO advises them to use it, right? They can use incentives, for example, and reduce port dues. This is an official recommendation by IMO. But I work for a nonprofit. I'm a bit more impatient with climate action. I want to see it sooner rather than later. So we think, based on what we've seen so far, that an actual mandate of some sort from the European Union would really turbocharge CII. And yes, port state control is a powerful mechanism, and we will have a next commission, next new parliament next year, and that's something that we think they can potentially take seriously. We already had a proposal from the European Commission to include the CII grades as part of the risk matrix in ship inspections, and that was, unfortunately, it hasn't gone so well so far. A number of EPP lawmakers saw it was not the right way to go, and they've been successful so far in the Transport Committee of the European Parliament. But there's still, I think, some space, some potential to at least make that step and anchor CII in the EU framework. But yeah, ideally, we would at some point like to see a requirement from the EU that would no doubt help to push the IMO debate as well.
Well, Timothy, maybe I can ask you for your response to the idea that there's a lack of enforcement, particularly when it comes to failing grades in the climate label.
I think the CII will, at the end of the day, generate emissions reduction based on two criteria. The first criteria is indeed enforcement. If nothing happened to a vessel that is D for 3 consecutive years, or is E, if there is no need for the vessel to define a corrective and to implement a corrective action plan in order to improve its operational carbon intensity requirements, then of course the effect of the policy measures will be much less than initially expected. That's one aspect. And the other aspect is the reduction factor, because the CII is not only about, looking at the operational carbon intensity of a vessel, it's also trying to compare that actual value to a target where we have each year an objective to reduce by a certain percentage the average operational carbon intensity of the fleet. So the ability of that measure to trigger real emission savings is indeed linked on the enforcement aspect, and also on the reduction factor that for the moment are only decided until 2026. So we still also will have important discussions to have at IMO to discuss about the level of ambitions that we want the CII policy to achieve towards 2030, also taking in mind the indicative checkpoint that were agreed in the revised strategy. Now, I mean, replying to Panos, I would like to highlight, as I did in my introduction, the fact that a lot is currently ongoing in terms of climate policies at EU level. With the Fit for 55 package, the EU has adopted a number of policies to reduce emissions from the shipping sectors. And that's important because we believe the sectors needs to contribute to the overall decarbonization efforts that we are all contributing to in the EU. And the focus is really at the moment to ensure that what has just been agreed is thoroughly being implemented and swiftly being implemented on the ground. But I see possible synergies between CII and other climate policy. And what Panos mentioned is also correct. I mean, the Commission typically proposed to take into account the CII values when calculating the risk profile linked to port state control inspection, meaning that if your ship is performing badly in terms of CII, then you might have a higher chance to be inspected in your port. That's already a proposal that was made by the Commission and that is currently being discussed by the two EU co-legislators. So they could be synergies in that respect, and that's exactly what IMO is pushing, because IMO is encouraging administration, port authorities, or different stakeholders to also give incentives to the ships that are the best rated in terms of CII, which is also a bit awkward not to have a transparent system if you want to incentivize the ships that are the best performing ones, because you first need to identify them.
Thank you. I would like to take some questions from our viewers as well. There's one here from Olaf Dreyer, a cross-commodity trader at Utility, and the question is for Daniel. It says, next to the EU area, are there other regions or hubs with policy measures for cleaner shipping? What measures are they as opposed to ETS compliance and CII targets in EU?
For shipping specifically, I think there are discussions ongoing around the globe. I know that there has been a few submissions to the US, in the US Congress about policies around ships, similarly to carbon pricing or FuelU and so on. I know that there are consultations around the globe around policies from, like in Australia as well. It's something that is ongoing. And but we also have some other policies that are kind of where shipping might be a good collateral effect. For instance, you have the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which is a way that we see as a regulation that can promote the availability, at least, of fuels for shipping, or e-fuels, or for shipping, or blue fuels as well for shipping. And we've done a study here where recently how you can leverage from both the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the ETS and the FuelU in Europe and make this hub of green shipping around US and EU. So our studies have shown, for instance, if you couple these two things, of course, Inflation Reduction Act is not targeted to shipping directly, but it will allow the fuel to be there at a cheaper level. That if you could combine both the carrot from the Inflation Reduction Act with the stick, or sometimes not so much the stick, but in the EU, you could get actually a valuable business case in this area for green shipping. So those are the two things I would like to highlight. But there are things being developed or discussed around the globe, and the expectation is that as soon as the IMO comes up with something that is international, global, as a regulation like ETS or a carbon pricing or GEG pricing or a GEG standard, that the need for local legislation for shipping might fall in a way or not be there. And if I may, I just wanted to react to the discussion before. I mean, enforcement, if I may, quickly. I think I just want to bring the idea that the enforcement might take different ways. The CII doesn't go alone. The CII goes with Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan. I think Timothy alluded to the plan that you need to put, like you need to have a plan on how you're going to comply with CII. So that plan goes in the SEMP, what we call Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan. And then there could be ways that we could achieve a higher enforcement of the CII by looking at the quality of the SEMP in a way. How good that plan is. If you put a plan of I'm going to do these, and that in order to achieve a good CII, a good quality check is to see if the SEMP has been actually implemented, like through audits of the SEMP and so on and so forth. So just to highlight that, we could think about enforcement that will go via restricting ships operation or not renewing certificates. That could be a quite harsh enforcement, but there could be other ways of enforcing the CII by, auditing the SEMP, for instance, in a better way, or having more restrictions around how the SEMP is actually being fulfilled in order to achieve a good CII rating. Just a thought I would like to bring to the discussion. But
Thank you very much indeed. We have another question here from Sophie Dayon from the Global Maritime Forum. An important dimension in the July revised IMO strategy is the inclusion of life cycle emissions well to wake in the new ambition. What are the speakers' expectations and insights on the upcoming guidelines on life cycle emissions planned at IMO MEP C81? Panos, I'm not sure if this is something you would like to come in on.
Well, we are at Environmental Defence Fund, generally speaking, we are very supportive of taking a well-to-wake approach to the impact of all marine fuels, and especially the alternative ones that will need to be assessed to be rewarded for the savings they have upstream. And also that the guidelines at IMO need to be in line with the latest science, and that can be a long and bumpy road. So that's why we contribute a lot to that work. But yeah, not directly related to CII in its current form. Yeah.
Thank you. Would either of our other speakers like to come in on this? Timothy, perhaps?
Yes, all the work that is being done on life cycle analysis, LCA, is extremely important. And the importance of well-to-wake emissions has also been acknowledged in the revised GHG strategy. And that's important because the end goal is not, just to displace emissions that are taking place in the sector to other sectors. So you could have a ship that is from a tank to wake basis, not emitting any emissions, but if in order to produce the fuel used on board that vessels, you are emitting a lot, then at the end of the day, you're just displacing emissions from the shipping sector to an inland sector. And that's not what we're aiming at. The objective is, at the end of the day, to reduce the quantity of greenhouse gas emissions that will be released in the atmosphere. And this is an aspect that is very important. The Commission is directly contributing to the development of the LCA guidance, which should continue being a scientific document reflecting all the best knowledge that we have on those life cycle aspects. And there is also the question of, in terms of reflecting about revision of CII is also something that could also be put on the table when discussing about the review is also the possibility for the CII to also encompass the full life cycle chain, so well-to-wake emissions. But it's particularly important well-to-wake emissions in order to promote the right type of alternative fuels.
Thank you. And Daniel, any thoughts on the idea of using well-to-wake in the new ambition?
I think well-to-wake vision is very important. I mean, I can only highlight the points that Timothy just put forward, and also Panos. It's hard to add something. I mean, the only thing that I would like to add to the discussion is that the role of precedence, in a way, in policy making. I think that the LCA guidelines that are being discussed in IMO, they are taking a very good shape, and I think that it's becoming a very comprehensive tool to measure the well-to-wake emission intensity of fuels. And it can, in my vision, it could only happen like this because of precedent work that happened. And one of the big policies that were there before the IMO LCA guidelines was the Renewable Energy Directive, with the an LCA calculation methodology and certification schemes and all of those things into place. So I mean, the only point is yes, it's a very important debate to be held. The well-to-wake emissions is very important that we promote the right fuels, and the well-to-wake visions they want to have, and I think precedents from the EU having worked on that was quite important for the IMO to achieve what it has achieved right now. And the same applies, I think, I would say, for the discussion we had earlier, EUMRV. I hope that the EUMRV granularity, the EUMRV transparency could be used as better. I mean, could be used as an example of precedence to make IMO move in the same direction as well. So that's the only point I would like to add.
Thank you very much. I just would like to get back to the topic of enforcement, which you've discussed quite a bit. Panos, maybe a question for you. So, I mean, you've said that the EU could take more action here. It doesn't have to be draconian, I believe you said, but they can take more action. The only question is, if the EU does decide to act using the CII, perhaps having restrictions or some other measure, is there a chance that we would see international backlash? I know that in aviation, for example, if the EU acts unilaterally, oftentimes they face criticism from other partners. What's the chance that we would see international backlash to such a move?
Thank you, Sean. That's an excellent question. Well, first of all, I think we've come a long way since a decade ago, and all that drama, for those who remember it, around stop the clock in aviation. And I think this is demonstrated by the fact that the EU is now taking decisive action on shipping by extending EU ETS to shipping and international shipping, right? Because emissions are related to EU trade, so it's understandable that the EU would try to request emissions allowances for some part of those. I think had this happened maybe a decade ago, we would have seen a backlash, but there's now a wider global understanding of where things are going. So frankly, I don't see it. When it comes to, I don't see that risk, I mean. And when it comes to CII, don't forget that the measure itself is a global one to begin with. So CII was developed by the IMO and endorsed by its 175 states. It can be really tricky starting from scratch with a blank sheet of paper with all the conflicting commercial interests and different types of shipping operations to arrive at a commonly agreed scheme like this one. So the fact that it exists is a major asset. And I really think that if countries and regions did more, both with carrots and sticks, they would face a lower risk of a backlash, because this is a measure that the other countries have endorsed as well. And don't forget that through its link to efficiency, it's also saving ship owners and charters ultimately money that they would be spending on fuel. So it's really, to me, it's a no-brainer. to do more with on CII.
Thank you.
I could add a complication.
Sure, go ahead.
I suppose just because it just hasn't come up so far. Pricing also incentivizes. So carbon pricing also incentivizes efficiency investments and cleaner operations. But shipping is complicated, and there are market barriers that mean that it will take some time for carbon pricing to comprehensively make that push and have that direct effect on greener, on energy efficiency. The advantage of CII, and these are not alternatives, right? They're in perfect synergy. You could use CII as a way to gauge also how well your other carbon reduction policies are going. But the advantage of CII is that it's more directly linked to the efficiency of the ship. There's no way with carbon pricing, you could always choose to pay more, let's say, and run a less efficient operation. If you had a CII requirement, you can't really do that.
That's an interesting point. Timothy, I want to give you a chance to respond. Firstly, Panos said that there's now a wider global understanding, which means that there's a lower risk of a backlash if the EU was to put in place enforcement measures. Do you agree with that?
I think Panos also highlighted the situation that occurred with the implementation of the Fit for 55 package. It's clear that from our point of view, climate change is, of course, a global issue. So if we agree on ambitious global response at global level, at IMO, this is preferable. And this is our objective, and we are fully committed as the EU to contribute to reaching the best possible measures at global level in order to address the very severe issue of climate change. But what the EU has shown over the last years is that if those ambitious measures are not putting in place at global level, then it's the role of the EU to push the bar higher and to act. And we know that by experience that these often also accelerate the debate at global level. So I don't think that we should be opposing actions at EU level with actions done by other countries or at global level.
Thank you. Daniel, what are your thoughts on the EU taking action here if others don't?
It just highlights the point that I made before. I think EU taking action, I think sets precedents, shows how it can work, how it can be done, and so on. And that facilitates the debate because it prepares, of course, EU to go to a debate at IMO, but also shows that it can be done. I think for the industry as a whole, the carbon pricing that we have, the ETS, and the TUE for maritime, it's good because the industry is getting ready for a potential future where the midterm measures will be likely similar to what we have the EU and so on. On the point of what the complication point that was raised by Panos, I can agree with Panos that shipping is complicated. We have multiple types of business cases. We have the ship owners that are ship operators and they sell their own services. We have the purely ship owners. We have the cargo owners have bareboat charter agreements. The charters have bareboat charter agreements so that they can control most of the ship. Those who are like on the spot market. So shipping can be quite complicated on the business arrangements that are there in the industry. So carbon pricing does not necessarily. I'm inclined to think, even though it's an ongoing study here in the center, I'm inclined to think that the carbon pricing will push for energy efficiency in some cases, but in some other cases it may not. So I think I kind of just want to highlight the idea that Panos suggested there as well in the end. But I would like to see all the work that is being done on the FuelEU and on ETS has been quite positive to raise again the debate, to show so that the industry can use these two schemes so that they can get used with the idea of a carbon pricing mechanism, of transferring costs, of making new business decisions based on what the carbon pricing looks like. And on the same, like a FUU, like a industry getting ready for the FUU, like new choices of fuel, what are the fuels they need to buy in the future, having these need to long-term visibility or long-term planning for, if I want to build a ship now and then I want this ship to sail in Europe, then it means that in 2045 we're going to have these GHG intensity reduction. So what fuel can I use then? So I mean, this mindset that is created because of the policy making the EU is good to prepare the industry as well for the IMO when they come with, and they will come. There's a commitment from IMO to come with midterm measures by 2027. I mean, enforced by 2027. So this will come. So it's the EU is setting a good precedence for, I mean, for policy making, but also for the industry to get ready for that when it comes. But that's my complementary comment.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, looking at the time, we are coming towards the end of our session. I do want to give each of you a chance to give your final remarks. Maybe we can take one last question from the viewers before we go. It's for Timothy. It's from Eric Schreiner. It says, how do you assess the impact of e-fuels derived from the utilization of captured CO2 for the decarbonisation of the maritime sector? And that's to Timothy.
So, I mean, fuels that are not coming from biological origin. So basically, you have two types of e-fuels. You can have the ones that are produced using biomass and that are of biological origin. Then you have the ones that are coming not from biological origin. Those fuels could that possibly use a carbon molecule that has been captured from an industrial process, for instance. They could have a role to play in the future. But what is important is to look again at the overall life cycle aspect and typically to ensure that overall we do not increase and that we do not basically double incentivize this type of fuel in case, for instance, carbon pricing is not applied both at the level of the usage of the fuel and also at the production of the fuel. So RFNBOs have clearly an important role to play, and we have policies in place to support their uptake, and also because we know that alternative fuel based on biomass are limited in terms of availability in comparison to typically RFNBOs. So there are already policies in place that are included typically in the FuelEU Maritime Regulation or in the RED to also support sustainable renewable fuel of non-biological origin. But important to keep in mind that the origin of the carbon molecule in such a case is of key importance.
Thank you very much. Well, we are coming to the end of our conference, but before we go, I would like to ask each of our panelists to give a one-sentence summation of the key takeaway message. Daniel, perhaps I can ask you to start with your one-sentence summation, please.
You didn't give a lot of time to think. I think it was a great discussion. To me, shows that there's a need, or there's at least around these the panelists here, a need to work to push further IMO and policy making for decarbonization shipping. And I think I got some ideas also, or confirmations that at least we need to continue pushing. So I think it was a good debate to bring awareness as well and new thoughts on the table. So I just want to thank for the opportunity to participate here today.
Thank you very much indeed. Timothy, your final remarks, please.
Yeah, I also would like to thank the other panelists for the very good discussion. I think all this discussion around CII, they highlight an important aspect is that in order to decarbonize the sectors, we will have to rely on alternative fuels, that's for sure, but we'll also have to increase energy efficiency of vessels. And in that respect, energy efficiency can be achieved through technical improvements, through better designed vessels, but also through more energy efficient operational behaviors. And that's a key aspect that is captured in the operational carbon intensity indicators that are CII. And it's important also to keep that dimension in mind, because alternative fuels will remain more expensive and scarce, and that's why it's very important to keep high in these discussions around decarbonization the need for improved energy efficiency.
Thank you very much. And Panos, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I also think similarly that as we head into a new world of alternative fuels, a lot of them, the truly sustainable ones, will be much more expensive. They will be expensive in terms of cost and money, as well as energy. So it's really, really important that shipping makes a big push on energy efficiency right now. And as next year, the focus of everyone shifts towards IMO and the basket of measures, the carbon pricing and the fuel standard, it's really important that we don't forget about CII. And specifically, I think that goes to the European Union, who can be a real champion of CII and energy efficiency, who can push for a strong review of CII, and can also not waste any time, and whether as a group or also individual states and ports can do lots already to promote more efficient vessels.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the close of today's conference, but I would like to thank all of our panelists for their excellent contributions today. Thank you to the Environmental Defence Fund for supporting today's debate. And of course, thank you to you, the viewers, for joining us. Well, that's all from the Euractiv studio here in Brussels for now. But in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.